Hi, I'm Kamya, and today I'll be taking you through a discussion about the deployment of AI in curbing spam calls and messages. In the recent past, India's telecom regulator has actively tried to curb spam, be it through launching a do not disturb application or consulting stakeholders on the deployment of a caller ID system. Just this month, it directed telecom providers to create an AI enabled spam detection system. In this video, we discuss how this system works as well as other spam curbing methods with Saikat Datta, the CEO of public policy think tank DeepStrat, and Nikhil Narendran, a partner at Trilegal Law firm. Okay, so my first question is for Saikat. This month, TRAI directed access providers to create a spam detection system. And in its press release, it admits that it had asked them to do this earlier as well, but the new one is AI enabled. And it says that the earlier system wasn't fully capable of catching spam because unregistered telemarketers would continuously evolve and create new techniques to send spam. How does an AI-enabled system, act as a better spam catcher? Would spammers be able to bypass it?
See, I don't think AI-enabled spam catcher will be any different because our problem is not so much the ability to catch. Even if you know who's a spammer, what is the action that has been taken, and how have you been in a position to ensure that the spammer or a bad actor does not become a repeat offender? What unfortunately is happening right now is that we are trying to look for tech solutions to problems of implementation or problems of governance. One cannot replace the other. Now, AI sounds very exciting, but what will the AI do? It will take a lot of inputs. Basically, it's machine learning. Well, the machine or whatever you create will keep learning and learning, and then try to use that to identify somebody in a smarter manner. But how much data will they collect? What kind of data protections will be available? What kind of privacy? How will you ensure that the wrong person does not get identified, etc.? None of those questions have been answered. And suddenly because everybody's excited about AI, let's get onto this bandwagon and ride it and see where it goes. That's not how, public policy should be evolved.
Right. And on the question of, data collection, we had talked to you earlier, Nikhil, in 2022 about for a story where we discussed how Airtel was using using filters to block words like TikTok and Discord. And around that time, you had mentioned that under telecom regulations, telecom operators are not supposed to look at messages and discriminate against them based on content. Would it even be possible for an AI spam filter to work without doing either of those?
No, it's not entirely possible. So the AI spam filter will have to look at at least basic customer information or basic customer data. But it need not look at the content itself, right? It's possible for the AI spam filter. So how will they analyze this? I mean, they'll just look at the patterns, right? Is a number making large number of calls to random numbers? Is there a pattern to it? And they will analyze the pattern and say that, look, it is likely that this particular user is using his or her telecom connection to make spam calls. That's how it will work. To figure out these patterns, you don't need to necessarily look at the content. Now, it could also look at content in a certain manner, for instance, the headers per se, right? It could also need not necessarily look at the content per se, but also look at large amounts of aggregated data, which says that, look, there are these categories of users who are using certain kinds of messages, like they are sending a lot of hyperlinks. And those users then could be tagged along with the patterns that gets developed over by way of, the usage patterns, right? There could be instances where these numbers completely become silent during night, which means that, they're not making these calls or they're not making, calling enough people. Right? If you just look at it, most of the spam happens during the day, right? So because, chances of conversion are much longer, much better when you make those calls during the day. And also just to add on to what Saikat said, right? I mean, it's just to, add an additional point there. The problem here is actually a design problem. It's a regulatory design problem. where the telcos are actually incentivized to ensure that more people make calls, more people send messages, because that's how they make money, right? If you make them a co-regulator in a model to prevent further calls and further messages from disseminating, they're not going to implement it. So if you want to really solve this problem, AI, look, I mean, AI can work, AI can do many things, but it'll just address a scale issue. It is not going to address the fundamental problem that's lacking here, which is that we need an independent sort of a regulator or an arbiter to determine whether somebody is making a spam calls and ensuring that there is some sort of a penalty, which is determined on a fair and reasonable basis. And so that, connections are denied, etc., or some sort of other disincentives are put on them. That sort of mechanism is what's needed, right? So AI is just not going to completely solve the problem.
Right. Again, going into the discussion on patterns of SMSs and calls, so TRAI mentioned that in its recent directives about the UCC detection system. So, Saikat, what do you think about what are the possible privacy repercussions of actually mapping out these patterns?
See, the first problem is that we don't have a data protection law in place even today. So, and no AI will be able to function unless, or ML will be able to function unless it gets access to data. So how do you, first of all, arrive at that balance? Secondly, if you are now going to ask the telecom companies to develop it on their own, how do you maintain a certain degree of standardization? Or how will you be able to audit or check what data is being collected, how is it being kept, whether that data can be taken at all, and so on and so forth. None of those questions have been worked out. So therefore, to suddenly jump into something like this, and then let's say you detect somebody you think is a spammer or you identify as a spammer. What are the corrective actions that you will take post that? Or if you misidentify a person as a spammer, then what are the consequences or what are the compensatory things that you can do to ensure that that person's interest is safeguarded and also compensated for wrongful identification? Now, those are important questions. And as Nikhil pointed out, this is a regulatory issue. And if you do not handle this right, we will have much more deeper repercussions of something like this.
Regulatory issue, I think that's an important aspect to look at. There has been previous regulation around this as well. There was the Do Not Disturb app that they came up with. There were spam filters that were being discussed in May. That's like been implemented in May. So, Nikhil, what do you think is the reason why this regulation is failing? Like, why are things not working so far?
So look, I think if I'm not wrong, there were 4 iterations of this, starting with somewhere in 2006 or 2007. Then there was another one somewhere in early 2010s. Then there was another one in 18, and 3 or 4 at least, right? I mean, so if you just look at it, all these, what the TRAI has trying to do is, earlier it was sort of like an independent sort of a mechanism where there was a D&D registry and whatnot. Then it sort of moved to a model where telcos become a co-regulators in the space based on their COPs, and they are supposed to come out with their own practices with respect to how to handle spam, right? So in all these models, what is really coming out very clear is the fact that there is a regulatory design problem, right? The design of the regulation is not necessarily creating an independent body. Even if TRAI were to just simply say that, look, we will just adjudicate this matter. I mean, of course, subject to the limitations under the TRAI legislation per se, they would have probably come out with a better solution. They don't have capacity to do it. There are several issues. But if just an independent body was to just be an arbiter with respect to this problem would have been solved. But unfortunately, TRAI doesn't have capacity. TRAI doesn't have full legislative backing or even backing from the government for that matter to implement a mechanism to solve this problem. And instead, they're making telcos who are making money for every call and every SMS that's being sent out, whether that's spam or not, right? They're making money out of it. And telling them, look, now you stop certain messages from going into a network. Why would I be sort of incentivized to do that, right? I'm losing revenue if I actually implement this law. Then why would I implement this law? So that is a fundamental problem. And that's a feature that's been there in all 3 versions or 4 versions of regulations, which have been there since, right? And every time you get a newer version of the law, we are actually seeing larger mistakes being made. That's the strangest part about this regulation altogether. A simple fix or a simple solution uh, could have been implemented. One, there are technological measures that could be implemented. There could be regulatory design related changes that could be implemented. There are many ways we can solve this problem, but the current model is probably the least successful amongst the lot, because it's also now creates a very disproportionate level of practices amongst telcos, because you're actually telling them to come up with different courses of practice. Now, this would have worked very well if we had a large telecom market. Like, for instance, there were 8 players in the market, and one company says that if you come to my network, I will ensure that no spam call will come to you. It would have given an incentive for a telco to do that. In a three or
Let
four
me
market,
let
it's
me
not.
interject you right there. I'm just wondering, when you say there's technical solutions for it, could you talk about them a little bit? Could you mention some?
So
I know
look,
there's the one about creating a independent body, but besides that, are there any solutions?
so I think, look, there are many solutions available. Look, like I said, tech is just not going to cut and solve this problem alone, right? So one of the proposals that the TRAI has been thinking about is with respect to the Scene app that they're talking about, which is basically the app to sort of stop the spam call, which is like, you can call it like the Truecaller equivalent of something that will work in the telecom network. And TRAI has already floated a consultation paper on this. Look, we can look at solutions where it's possible for people to actually disclose their number if they are actually calling from a commercial line number, or if not, if you're calling from their individual number, also their name or number could be displayed from the perspective of preventing spam. But that has got other implications. I mean, privacy implication is, of course, another one. We also have large amount of data with our mobile number portability players, right? So every call that goes on a telecom network goes through the network of a mobile number portability operator, because they hold the repository, and they sort of pass the information to which network this number belongs to. So there are existing databases. There are, of course, apps like Truecaller app, which exists in the market, right? Which helps prevent spam for a long way. I mean, so I never used to use Truecaller before, but now the spam situation in this country is absolutely crazy. I get at least 20 calls a day, that I had to become a Truecaller subscriber to ensure that I don't get disturbed during my busy hours. So there are several possible solutions. Each one of it has its own challenges. Each one of it has its own complications per se. There is no perfect model or right approach that's really evolved as of now. But a combination of all these could be looked at to solve this problem of spam calling. And I'll tell you why it is very important. I think from the perspective of spam calling, it's earlier it was just nuisance. Now it is actually elevated to another level where these numbers are being used for phishing attacks, for sophisticated online fraud attacks. The number of cases that we deal with on a regular basis, even the firm itself or my colleagues who practice similar kinds of law, with respect to online financial frauds, has just skyrocketed during COVID. Right, the amounts are just crazy, and the use of phone numbers for these sort of frauds are just increased so much. And especially, it's actually the digitally illiterate or digitally underprivileged population of India who is falling prey to it, right? Including our parents' generation, including those folks who are not digitally literate and they don't have access to the same kind of knowledge and technology that we are. So there is actually a duty on the state also to protect the citizens and come up with a better frame.
Okay, so Nikhil mentioned something about a caller name display system. So I know DeepStrat has done a response to this. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about the privacy implications of something like that, Saikat.
So DeepStrat, as Nikhil mentioned, when the CNAP consultation took place, we did a internal deliberation, and you see the DeepStrat has many stakeholders in the sense that we also have people who have an LEA background, people who have a technology background. So we all sought together and first developed an institutional position. And we realized, what they were suggesting will not work because they haven't understood and identified the problem properly. Second, the privacy implications are so huge that actually you are trying to build a solution which is deeply disproportionate to what the problem actually is. And third, again, going back to this very interesting point that Nikhil made, like, for example, today, identifying why spam call takes place. Now, one could be, say, on a scale of threats. One could be just normal marketing of a normal, like somebody trying to sell some laptops or some insurance and stuff like that, or even real estate. So that's on a lower scale. But then there is a lot of spam today, or what we loosely call spam, are basically threat actors trying to actually defraud you through either social engineering or even trying to place a vector on your device so that they can gain access to your device and do even more harm. So that gradation is there. None of this is being graded from that perspective. Now, moment you start grading, also the number of stakeholders start increasing. Like at some point, by just a normal kind of marketing, etc., TRAI, through some adjudication process or in consultation with the telecom operators, take some action against those. But where it is specifically designed for malware or threats or cyber crimes, etc., you need the police to come in. You need regulators like the RBI or to a certain extent NPCI to come in. So then the implications, the role, the criticality, everything changes. Now, if you see, DeepStrat had also done a study with Haryana police couple of years. It took us almost 2 years to do that study specifically on retail, financial, digital cyber crimes. And we realized that the spammers and the scamsters are far ahead in terms of technology and social engineering and methodologies, or what we call TTPs, which is tactics and procedures, etc., far ahead than LEAs, etc. We are always trying to catch up. So while we will be sucking out a lot of data in trying to say that this will protect you against spammers and cause some kind of privacy harms and other kinds of harms, and also probably revenue loss to our telecoms who are already under strain for various kinds of things within the current business environment, you will also end up not being able to identify the spammers or take effective action. Just to give you a real world analogy, every municipal corporation says that you can't place posters all over the city from a municipal corporation or but posters are there, and during every election you will find hundreds and thousands of posters. Sometimes the municipal corporation says, okay, figure out who printed those posters and we'll take action against them. But my point is that if the posters are going up against a certain candidate to help a certain candidate before an election, are we taking action against the candidate? Because if you're able to then disincentivize the candidate will be so worried that he or she will not want any unnecessary posters at undesignated areas to come up. So similarly, if a marketing firm is employing spammers to make these kind of calls, the intended beneficiary, are they being targeted? Similarly, for scamsters, are the key stakeholders, LEA or RBA or NPCI or I4C or whoever you want to call them? We have an alphabet soup of all these names trying to work together. Are they coming together and building any solutions? Our research clearly shows that is not happening.
Another thing.
Do you mind if I ask a question to Saikat? This is just for my knowledge.
Yeah, sure.
So, and also just before I ask the question, there's one point to make. Look, so Saikat, so there was a previous iteration of the law where if, let's say, a bank employed a telemarketer and you made a call, the bank's telecom connection could also be suspended. It actually caused a serious disproportionate effect on the whole banks itself, because sometimes even the banks don't even know, right? They would have given it to a outsourcing service provider, who would have given it to some marketer, who would have given it to some random person who was on the streets, and there were like several chains of subcontracting, and there were several issues which came out of that. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not entirely a bad outcome. Probably people will be more responsible, right? If you design systems like that, but just pointing that out. My question to you, Saikat, is slightly on the privacy side of things, right? So if you create a database, which is not a searchable database, right? But basically a database where, let's say, Kamya is trying to reach me, right? If Kamya is trying to reach me, right? Kamya is making the initiative to say that, look, I am this person, I am Kamya. I am trying to reach this person, Nikhil Narendran, because my number is already with Kamya, right? So isn't it privacy preserving for me to know who is trying to reach me? Because it's not the other way around. I cannot go and look up Kamya's number on a database and reach out. right? It's a reverse mechanism where if a third person X is trying to call me, I would want to know who that X is. Isn't that actually respecting my privacy, or do you see other implications? Maybe, I'm blindsided by my thinking. That's why I'm asking you this question.
No, see, there are, as I said, two sides or several sides actually to the same story. So also context will matter here. In this case, that if the third person may be trying to reach you for a legitimate reason as well. Like, for example, let's say there's a medical emergency and suddenly somebody from the hospital is trying to get in touch with you, but you've never known that person and don't have their number, etc. They're actually trying to reach out for a genuine cause. Then in that situation, how do you then figure out whether that is a legitimate call or not? Most of the time, you will be able to take action post facto having received the call. So trying to do a mechanism, and also since you did mention that a database which is not searchable, any AI would have to have a database which is searchable, because otherwise how would the AI therefore or the ML start working? So within that, from a technology perspective as well as from a privacy perspective, it's something that will have to depend on the context under which those calls. Because many times, for example, say a client is trying to reach out to you, they've just heard about you from somebody saying this is a great law firm and this particular partner is somebody who's an authority on the subject. Chances are they'll reach out to you on mail, but somebody may want to also have a word with you and they're trying to make a call. Now, if that person gets identified as spam for some reason or is not able to establish that contact, there's a revenue loss to you also, because here somebody legitimate was trying to get in touch with you.
So I think there's one slide, there are two aspects, right? I mean, I'm talking about as a digitally literate person, I try and avoid taking calls from unknown numbers, right? No client has ever reached out to me. I mean, they have reached out to me, but I'm saying unless I see a message, I don't take calls from an unknown number. That's from a digitally literate person's perspective, right? That cannot generally apply to the larger population. I agree. When I say searchable database, what I mean is searchable by individuals, right? Not by AI, right? Or not by any software algorithm systems. And even that flagging per se, I think flagging should be a second level, right? I mean, if we need to get there. The first is about disclosing the identity of person who's trying to reach you, right? Second is a flag aspect to it, which is basically which could be extremely problematic, like you said. A genuine case may not get connected. Someone has a genuine business, but he or she is unable to reach out to their customers because there are some patterns which emerged and the AI has flagged them wrongly. So I think with adequate human in the loop and human over the loop systems, if we create robust mechanism for that oversight, I'm not saying it's entirely solvable, but a lot of concerns could be managed much better with a proper appeal system and processes. But I totally agree. I mean, when we try to do this, if the idea is that tech will do its job and everybody should just sit back and just stand aside, it's not going to work. It needs to work by way of a proper grievance redressal mechanism where there is proper independent oversight over the mechanism that's been implemented by someone. And I think that we may be able to develop something that works on the basis of good smart contracting models, right? Even for that matter, currently we have no visibility on how the penalties are enforced by the telcos on various courts, right? Because it's not subject to any sort of transparent mechanism. Are there preferential treatment given to certain kinds of entities who are like probably bulk users of these telcos? We are not privy to that information, right? So unless there is an accountability mechanism which is created within the industry itself, no tech system will work. But I think if we do that, probably there is a chance that some of these systems, a combination permutation, could be much better to prevent spam calls.
I think the answer to that is what you mentioned, that if we have the right kind of oversight mechanism, that solves a lot of these issues that we're talking about. Unfortunately, in this country, getting that oversight right is always a major challenge, and many authorities, like you look at the state of public consultation today, I mean, you rarely find good public consultation which is then can be traced back to good policy. And because those regulatory failures, bad public consultation, etc. happens. Now within that framework that you've created now, for example, who is going to identify also matters. So if you have accountable people, say within them, accountable for the sake of argument, the telcos who are experts, therefore they're identifying. So, but there we also know they're working within a system which has checks and balances. Suddenly the trust in the system goes up, and then the system can start working pretty well.
Okay, I just had one more question. So, recently I saw that Bajaj Finance announced that it will allow people the option to opt out of receiving telemarketing calls. But at the same time, they've also said that once somebody does it, they must make sure to never apply for the company's products again. I wanted to ask you, Nikhil, is it feasible for companies to do this? And if yes, how does this affect the implementation of spam detection systems or spam filters in general?
So, I mean, look, it's feasible in the sense that, look, when they can block someone by way of a number, but that's going to be extremely problematic from several perspectives. Like, for instance, I'm sure Bajaj Finance is an NBFC, which is subject to an RBI license, which is subject to a fair course of practice of lending. And they cannot just take a call based on their promoter's decision. Legally, if someone deserves a credit, there are good reasons to give a person credit. I think that person deserves the access to credit, right? Otherwise, these sort of actions will have an impact on the fundamental right of a person to carry on their trade and business and profession. So they cannot just blanket say that. I mean, look, even if they can, let's say, put up a technical measures to sort of eliminate, and if it's ever come to scrutiny, that can be challenged before a court of law, and they cannot organizationally make such a call. And it's also very bad PR for them. I'm sure it's just a very different generation talking about these things without fully understanding it.